are listening to 106.7 Wilmington's Big Talker, and my name is Paul Vallone. I would like to welcome you to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, where each Sunday at 5 p.m., as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. In case you aren't familiar with me, I direct Grassroots North Carolina, or GRNC, since 1994, our state's most effective gun rights organization. As its director, I was involved in drafting and passing our original concealed handgun law. Since then, GRNC has gone on to engineer passage of concealed handgun reciprocity, our purchase permit bypass, Castle Doctrine and Stand Your Ground, the expansion of concealed carry into state and municipal parks, restaurants, public assemblies, educational properties, and much more. Grassroots North Carolina is exactly what the name implies, a grassroots collection of people from all walks of life who share a common concern that our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms are being eroded. Check us out at grnc.org, that's grnc.org. In gun rights news, you may have heard the latest gun control proposal from former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords and her husband, astronaut Mark Kelly, who have changed the name of their gun control organization from what it used to be Americans for Responsible Solutions to simply the Giffords PAC, perhaps in recognition of the fact that their proposed solutions are anything but responsible. Well, their latest gun ban wish list depicts clearly how their utopian world would look as they now propose a series of bans to include, wait for it, muzzle loaders. Yes, Gabby and company now want to ban firearms which take a minute or longer to load a single round and have been around for roughly 500 years. Now, much of their gun ban wish list makes sense, at least from their statist government will protect us perspective. The usual stuff. Shotguns that hold more than a few rounds, AR-15 pistols, especially if they have those nasty old stabilizing braces, which the BATFE has told us in the past would subject us to a felony prosecution if we were to put them to our shoulders. Now, apparently, it's not so much the case, but that's a long story in itself. And, of course, they want to ban those horrible .50 caliber rifles that have so vexed gun control advocates since the 1990s. In fact, as I recall, California banned them in the 90s, prompting Ronnie Barrett, the founder of Barrett Firearms Manufacturing, to immediately suspend all sales and service to every police organization in California that used the Barrett .50 caliber rifle. I love those kind of guts. But a company recently began marketing a suppressed muzzle-loading rifle. Yes, suppressed muzzle-loading rifle, which, because muzzleloaders are exempt from 18 U.S. Code, is not regulated by the National Firearms Act of 1934, as, of course, are other suppressors. When I saw the press release from this company, I just knew the lefties would go all unhinged. So never mind that we all know suppressed firearms aren't silenced at all, especially a black powder muzzle-loading version that would be spitting fire and smoke. Never mind that we're talking about single-shot firearms, which take a full minute and considerable dexterity to reload. Nope. To Gabby and Mark, and whatever they're calling themselves today, these firearms are thoroughly dangerous. To wit, and this is what they said, this is verbatim, mind you, cue the .50 caliber muzzleloader, which delivers a particularly lethal .50 caliber round. This weapon is designed with a built-in device to suppress its sound. If any other firearm were built with such a device, it would be subject to the NFA, that's National Firearms Act, as a silencer. But since this device is designed to suppress the sound of something that is exempt from federal firearms laws, it is not considered a silencer and not subject to the NFA. In fact, it is not subject to any laws at all and can be bought online. Ooh, that particularly lethal 50 caliber round. Now, if you want to see something funny, check out the YouTube video of Fox News' Tucker Carlson verbally dismantling New York City Council member Jumaine Williams, who, when directed to the fact that muzzleloaders, as the least lethal type of gun, have been implicated in exactly 0 crimes, Jumaine tries to make the case for banning them on the eventuality that that might someday happen. Carlson points out that the crafters of the gun ban, and I love this phrase, know literally nothing about the guns they want to ban. But on a more serious note, if you are ever inclined to say, well, they just want to ban those nasty old assault weapons, they don't want to ban my hunting shotgun, remember this and know that if they are given a chance, they will ban every firearm. Elsewhere, I have to confess this is not really gun rights news, but I just can't resist it anyways. Call it, and I love this word, Schadenfreude, if you will. That's a wonderful German word that means taking pleasure in the misfortunes of your enemies, in this case, of course, the leftists. Yes, it's an indulgence, but you should try it. It makes it so much easier to fight leftism while not becoming truly angry all the time. I want you to remember this phrase: Senator Fishlips must go. As you recall from last week, I refer to Harvey Weinstein as the gift that keeps on giving, as Hollywood leftists could no longer practice their decades-old hypocrisy of applying their moral standards to you while ignoring them themselves. First, Hollywood turned on itself and started dredging up long-suppressed sexual harassment charges against a variety of stars such as Kevin Spacey, Ben Affleck, and of course, alleged comedian Louis C.K. But then the witch hunt began to spread to equally harassment-prone politics. We've known for some time that not only leftists, but also establishment so-called Republicans have wanted to derail the Senate bid of Judge Roy Moore, Alabama's true conservative for the U.S. Senate, and I didn't fully realize this until I looked him up. He was twice elected to the Supreme Court and twice removed from the Supreme Court. Apparently he doesn't shy away from controversy. Given that what the deep state has done to Donald Trump, it's little wonder that the Washington Post would scour the earth to dredge up decades-old, unprovable allegations against Moore, that is, as a little October surprise. It isn't any great surprise that rather than elect a true conservative, statists like Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell would instead scream for Moore to get out of the race, thereby continuing the Republican tradition of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, because at this point, Moore's name cannot be replaced on the ballot. On the upside, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey just came out and said that she plans to vote for Moore, potentially bringing female voters back into the fold. So, you heard it here first. Judge Roy Moore is going to win the Alabama special election for Attorney General Jeff Sessions' Senate seat. And then, as with Donald Trump, the real fireworks will begin. But the lefties' boomerang came back and hit them squarely in the forehead when photos of Senator Al Franken, God, I hate using those three words together, Senator Al Franken. Anyway, Senator Al Franken groping the breasts of a sleeping radio host and former model named Leanne Tweeden. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk about Al Franken. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Please join us after the break as we continue to discuss the circular firing squad the left has created. My name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. As we were saying before the break, the left's boomerang came back and hit them squarely in the head when photos turned up of Senator Al Franken, and once again, I hate using those three words together, Senator Al Franken. Well, anyways, Senator Al Franken groping the breasts of sleeping radio host and former model Leanne Tweeden. And not just 30-year-old unsubstantiated allegations, mind you, like they have with Judge Roy Moore. Nope, these are nice, glossy photos of a fine United States senator grabbing the breasts of a sleeping victim while grinning his I can get away with this, I guess that's the only way to put it, his I can get away with this grin into the camera. Worse, his victim now says that at a separate part of the same UN tour, he grabbed her and, with neither warning nor her permission, kissed her and stuck his tongue down her throat, leading this model, Tweeden, to tell Sean Hannity about that slimy kiss and how she referred to him thereafter as fish lips. Now, ignoring for a moment that the Washington Post, once again crossing over from journalism to left-wing activism, is trying to do damage control for Franken by interviewing the few women the senator didn't harass, yet they don't seem the slightest bit interested in the account of Melanie Morgan of MediaEqualizer.com, who just a couple of days ago told Laura Ingraham that Al Franken stalked and harassed her after a joint TV appearance. And so what does Mitch McConnell, our Senate Majority Leader, do in response to the allegations against Al Franken? I mean, after all, he's called for Roy Moore to step down from his Senate bid over 30-year-old unsubstantiated allegations. So what does he do with Al Franken? Well, faced with photographic evidence of a United States senator groping a sleeping victim, he says he's going to have an ethics investigation. Well, here's a news flash, Mitch. Unless Al Franken says the picture was photoshopped, which, by the way, he has not, what exactly is there to investigate? Repeat after me, folks, and I hope some enterprising soul will sell bumper stickers to this effect. Repeat after me, Senator Fish Lips must go. Oh, and in closing on this subject, allow me to interject one more little example of schadenfreude, namely watching liberals squirm in the current environment whenever Bill Clinton is mentioned. After decades of destroying any woman who accused Bill Clinton of sexual misconduct, after all, as James Carville once phrased it, drag a $100 bill through a trailer park, you never know what you'll find. So, after decades of destroying these women, now New York Times editorialist Michelle Goldberg proudly proclaims, "I believe Juanita." That would be Juanita Broderick, that liberals have laughed at for decades as she described how Bill Clinton raped her. No, not groped, not kissed, not fondled, not made suggestive comments to. No, raped. But of course, according to Goldberg, all this was understandable. How liberals could choose not to believe Clinton's accuser because, after all, those nasty old conservatives had weaponized the accusations, and, after all, that was then and this is now. It's a different era with different standards, right? You mean kind of like judging by current standards the Civil War heroes whose monuments are being ripped down? Never underestimate the left's hypocrisy. So, in the era of moral relativism and, frankly, nihilism, yet another nutcase has shot up yet another community after yet another failure of gun control to stop a killer bent on mass carnage. Like most of his ilk, the Rancho Tehama, California shooter, born right here in Cary, North Carolina, has a long history of well-documented violence. Cary. That's the bastion of liberalism, or one of them in North Carolina. I wonder if that has anything to do with it. Anyways, known by his family to be a drug abuser with a history of mental instability, the killer was under a worthless restraining order after stabbing one of his neighbors. That restraining order prohibited him from having guns. Indeed, police reported confiscating his firearms. Yet after that, the police responded multiple times to neighbors who reported his gunfire, complained about him shooting guns when he was prohibited from owning guns. Yet the police never confiscated the weapons he used, nor did they arrest him for illegal possession of those firearms. And once again, the only thing that stopped the rampage was a good guy with a gun, in this case, 2 law enforcement officers who encountered the shooter at an intersection and shot him dead. Now, one interesting wrinkle in this case is that the shooter reportedly made his own guns. The reaction of the left was predictable, of course. Daily Kos blames, and I quote, "cowardly Congress owned by the NRA." Gabby Giffords and company called for the laundry list of gun bans I discussed earlier, up to and including banning those nasty old ancient muzzle-loading firearms. But in truth, though the left may fail to recognize it, this is their worst nightmare. In this case, the shooter built his AR-15 from an 80% lower, which is a partially machined piece of metal that needs to be finished by someone with metalworking skills. To regulate that, the federal government would have to pretty much regulate all aluminum. But in Britain, for example, a complete ban on gun ownership led criminals to modify firearm replicas to shoot live ammo. Despite strict gun laws, Afghans are building their own fully automatic AK-47s, sometimes in open-air shops, and never forget that if you're going to make illegal weapons, they might as well be machine guns rather than semi-automatic weapons, because they're illegal anyway, so they might as well be machine guns, which have been restricted here since 1934. And then, of course, we have the gun banners' real nightmare: utterly untraceable guns that are now being made with 3D printers. What the gun ban advocates fear is that this utterly undermines their supply-side argument to limit violence, which, of course, is not about limiting violence at all, but instead about exerting additional control over you, the citizenry. You see, that is what they fear. That despite their efforts to deconstruct society, thereby increasing violence, as I've said in the past, their mission for moral relativism gives the mentally disturbed the tools to internally justify mass killing of other people for the purpose of notoriety. So, despite their efforts to create more governmental control, ostensibly to keep you safe, but in reality to keep you pacified, their fear is that ultimately nothing short of a full autocracy might suffice to control you. And of course, the problem with that, not that I really have a problem with autocracy, but it is far more difficult to get citizens to buy off on totalitarianism than more intermediate steps. So, right now, we're going to take a break. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. Please join us after the break when we will resume our conversation about guns, gun control, and more importantly, how they want to control you. And you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. I would like to pick up our discussion with a look at an op-ed which recently ran in the Raleigh News and Observer, which I call Pravda, by the way, official news organ of the Communist Party, and presumably elsewhere across the country. It was written by one John Morlino, who describes himself as, and I quote, a former social worker who founded the essence of true humanity is compassion, ethic, to promote peace, nonviolence, and unconditional compassion. I want you to hear this because it exposes the thrust of the left's arguments against private gun ownership and for additional governmental control. And of course, it exposes the flaw in that argument. Here it is, and this was called, 50 Million Ways to Curb Gun Violence in America. And I quote, after murdering his wife a day earlier, a gunman went on a shooting spree in northern, It is called 50 Million Ways to Curb Gun Violence in America. And it says, and I quote, after murdering his wife a day earlier, a gunman went on a shooting spree in Northern California, killing at least 4 more people and wounding as many as 10, some of them children. If not for the quick thinking of officials at a local elementary school who locked the doors to the building and its classrooms moment before, I'm not going to use his name, the shooter's arrival, casualties would have been higher. Tuesday's rampage ended when the shooter, a former Cary resident, was fatally shot by police. If this feels like a recurring nightmare to you, you are not alone. It isn't just a bad dream. 3 of the 5 most deadly shootings in modern American history have occurred during the past 18 months. There is a direct correlation between the number of people who perish during an episode of gun violence and the amount of media attention it receives. Yet, despite our obsession with body counts, grief cannot be quantified. 3 weeks before our nation's largest mass shooting in recent history, the October 1st slaughter at an outdoor music festival in Las Vegas, 2-year-old Kyrie Myers found a loaded gun in his South Carolina home and accidentally shot himself to death. Upon finding his son, his distraught father, Keon Myers, committed suicide with the same weapon. Each of these tragedies comes laden with a horror unto itself, as do the rest of our country's gun-related fatalities. These devastating acts of violence highlight the fragility and unpredictability of the human psyche. Listen to that one very carefully. If you're looking for a focal point in our ongoing debate over guns, you won't do better than that. Though we'd prefer not to think about it, the truth of the matter is that on any given day of any given year, you or I could be rendered emotionally unstable due to severe trauma, disease, illness, or myriad other life-shattering experiences. Transformations of this magnitude usually happen gradually. At other times, they seemingly happen overnight. Adding a personal mix to the firearm to the mix increases the likelihood of additional suffering. Outlawing all versions of automatic and semi-automatic weapons, keeping guns out of the hands of domestic abusers, and requiring the licensing and registration of, and comprehensive background checks, flawed as they might be, for every firearm purchase or transfer would certainly help. But even if we attain such consensus, it still won't be possible to predict anyone's long-term state of mind. The, quote, responsible gun owner, end quote, of today is a roll of the dice away from becoming tomorrow's gruesome headline. No form of legislation, with the exception of banning guns altogether, can ever account for that, which leaves us with only one viable option. Take it upon ourselves to restore a greater level of safety in our society, one home at a time. Should you live in one of the 50 million U.S. households equipped with a firearm, ask yourself the following. Am I sickened by the carnage wrought upon our communities? Am I at peace with making it easier for my loved ones to commit suicide? How would I feel if the sound in the next room was that of my child accidentally shooting one of their siblings to death? If you responded to these questions the way I think you have, then become part of the solution and do away with your guns. Well, I'll ignore for a moment the fact that each one of these shooters, with perhaps one exception, has had long histories of violence, and that the vast majority of violence in the United States and probably across the world is perpetrated not by people who have been normal up to some point that they snap, but rather people with a long history of brushes with the law. And in fact, most murder victims, as documented any number of different places, most murder victims are themselves murderers. So here is my response. And I have debated this point before. When Gail Neely was the head of North Carolinians Against Gun Violence, we once participated in a group debate during which one of the pro-gun sides said, and I quote, "It isn't the law-abiding people you need to worry about." To which Gail bleated, and I can only say bleated like a sheep, bleated this reply, "They're law-abiding till they're not." That is classic leftist thinking. That everybody is just one psychotic episode away from mass violence, and that, therefore, nobody can be trusted. It is what I call society of the lowest common denominator. And it is based not on inspiring people to do their best, but on presuming that they, like the scum who populate MS-13 or other gangs, will always be at their worst. The solution, of course, is more government. Government which is so crucial because, after all, you need to be protected from yourself. But an interesting thing happens in a society of the lowest common denominator, namely that people live down to your expectations. Before the Berlin Wall came down, I knew a West German businessman whose business often took him to East Germany, the socialist utopia which Antifa and the other various people's movements want us to adopt. My friend used to complain constantly about the Ossis, Ost being East in German, the Easties, if you will. The Ossis, their lack of work ethic, honesty, and their lack of motivation. Now, this was a perfect experiment. Two groups of Germans, one living in capitalism, classic Western values, the other exposed to generations for whom nothing was expected, and all, such as it was given. All wasn't much, but they didn't have to do anything for it. The result? Its people did precisely what was expected of them. Nothing. The author's apparent ignorance that accidental gun deaths among children and adults are at an all-time low, after declining precipitously for decades, is topped only by his ignorance that it is precisely his solution which has caused the 60-year disintegration of Western culture, and with it the rise of moral relativism which allows those with mental disorders to justify to themselves mass killing. If you take his argument to its logical extreme, you can't be trusted with matches because you might light a fire. We never know what you might do, and therefore you must be under the thumb of that all-benevolent government. That is liberalism. That is what they want for you, what they think is necessary. We're going to take a break. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Please join us after the break when we will resume our conversation about guns, gun control, and more importantly, how they want to control you. My name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Elsewhere in gun rights news, you may recall that last week we discussed Stephen Williford, the hero who stopped the church massacre in Sutherland Springs, Texas, by grabbing his AR-15, an empty magazine, and a handful of cartridges, and then, while reloading while running, intercepted the shooter outside the church, exchanging gunfire at a distance of 20 yards and shooting the perpetrator twice. Finally, Williford commandeered a ride, chased the shooter by car at high speeds, and finally covered him with his rifle over the hood of the car until police arrived. You may recall that Williford specifically credited the capabilities of the AR-15 he used to defeat a rifle-wielding killer wearing body armor, saying, and I quote, "If I had run out of the house with a pistol and faced a bulletproof vest and Kevlar and helmets, it might have been futile." So what does the man who is entertaining running for the presidency in 2020 have to say about this? When asked at a press conference, and here's the question he received: "So, with the tragedy that just happened in Texas, my question is, how do you justify the Democratic view on gun control when the shooter was stopped by a man who is legally licensed to carry a gun? The response by former Vice President and would-be future President Joe Biden, who has said he wants to run for the presidency, he said, and I quote, "Well, first of all, the kind of gun being carried, he shouldn't be carrying." Biden then went on to take credit for writing the federal assault weapons ban in effect from 1994 to 2004. I guess this will give you an idea what your options are in the next presidential race. Once upon a time, I had an acquaintance at BBC, that's the British Broadcasting Network, Brian, who had come across to the United States to do a documentary on American grassroots organizations and their impact on the American election process. In covering the gun issue, he chose Grassroots North Carolina and actually followed us around for several days, filming at gun shows and competitions and generally interviewing our people. Brian and I actually continued emailing back and forth for a couple of years afterward, at least until he told me he was leaving BBC to go work for Al Jazeera, and I pretty much said, "Are you nuts?" We didn't speak much after that. But one of the things I used to enjoy pointing out to Brian were the many articles depicting the rise of crimes involving firearms in the world's great gun control laboratory, Great Britain. After all, since 1997, following the Dunblane massacre, and see if this sounds familiar, the UK virtually banned the private ownership of firearms. This in an island nation with tightly controlled borders and law enforcement that borders on being characteristic of a police state. I've traveled in Britain, and I can assure you it's not fun. And this, of course, is a country which, for all practical purposes, does not recognize the use of deadly force to defend one's life, even in the most dire circumstances. So, what happened after Britain banned guns? Crime went up, of course, especially what they call hot burglaries, or we call them home invasions, namely burglaries against occupied dwellings, because unlike in the U.S., in the U.K. the perpetrator stands no chance of being shot. But most interestingly, gun-related crime went up as well. And as much as Piers Morgan tried to deny this to Dr. John Lott in a recent interview, yes, unfortunately, Piers Morgan is still on television in Britain, having, of course, been driven from our shores. I guess they find his stuff mainstream for them. Anyways, what Piers refused to acknowledge was that the increase in British gun crime after his country banned guns has been both pervasive and persistent. Most recently, Britain's Office for National Statistics, ONS, statistical bulletin, which is called Crime in England and Wales, noted an increase in gun-related crime of 27% for the year ending June 2017. The bulletin noted the latest rise continues an upward trend in firearms offenses in the last few years. So much for gun control. And finally, another gun control sellout may be in the offing. This bipartisan proposal is called the Fix NICS Act and has the bill number Senate S-2135. NICS, of course, being the National Instant Background Check System, the computerized background check system used for gun purchases. In addition to the usual suspects, Senator Richard Blumenthal and Chris Murphy, Democrats of Connecticut, and Senator Dianne Feinstein, Democrat of California, The Republicans signed on and reportedly include none other than Senator John Cornyn of Texas, the number 2 Republican in the Senate, who was described by the New York Times as a, quote, staunch foe of gun control, and also Senator Orrin Hatch, Republican of Utah. Incidentally, also signing on to be a sponsor of this gun bill is Senator Tim Scott, Republican from South Carolina. On one hand, the proposal, as stated, is relatively modest, both requiring and incentivizing states and federal agencies to improve reporting of data to the FBI's National Instant Background Check System, or NICS. The problem, as I see it, is that it writes new gun laws to compensate for state and federal agencies' failure to adhere to old gun laws, since these things have been required to be reported since 1994. Then, of course, we have the players involved. Nothing that Senators Feinstein and Murphy have to say on the gun issue can be trusted. Now, we will keep you apprised on this issue, but meanwhile, I want you to grab a pen because I need you to write down 2 phone numbers and to call 2 United States senators, namely Senator Richard Burr and Senator Thom Tillis. You can reach Senator Burr at 800-685-8916, and you can call Senator Thom Tillis at 919-856-4630. Again, call Burr at 800-685-8916 and call Tillis at 919-856-4630. Yes, these are their district offices, not their Washington offices. You'll get more attention that way. And make sure to tell them unequivocally that no compromise on gun control is acceptable. You may recall that the last time the powers that be, with NRA assistance, fixed the NICS system with the so-called NICS Improvement Act of 2011, a total of 260,381 veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder lost their gun rights. And the Obama administration tried to use it yet again to deny gun rights to tens of thousands of Social Security recipients who had designated payees to handle their finances. Indeed, Murphy calls this measure an important milestone that shows the real compromise that can be made on the issue of guns. Compromise? Ask yourself what supporters of the Second Amendment get from this compromise. And never forget that compromise, as our opposition defines it, denotes a process in which you might lose slightly less than under their original proposal, but you still lose. My name is Paul Vallone, and you have been listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com, where each Sunday at 5 p.m., as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition you need to better defend your right to keep and bear arms. I also encourage you to check out my website at gunspoliticsandfreedom.com. Spell out that and, gunspoliticsandfreedom.com. Otherwise, I will see you next Sunday at 5.